Today's, we're here in Adelaide. The next part of the session, I really wanted to put a bit of a spotlight on South Australia, on soils in South Australia, and the role that the CRC is playing and the role that our South Australian partners are playing. So hey, we come from all across Australia, different states, etc., and New Zealand too. Welcome to our New Zealand colleagues. Welcome here to South Australia, to Adelaide. So to do that, our next speaker is Dr. Kathy Ophel-Keller, who's the Acting Executive Director of the South Australian Research and Development Institute, SARDI. And just to point, some of you know this, but I did my PhD for the CRC for Soil and Land Management here in South Australia at the University of Adelaide back in the 90s. Kathy was a program leader in that CRC, working for SARDI. So she's been around the CRC program a lot herself. She's a great supporter of our CRC. Having said that, Kathy's family's been impacted by COVID. She's not here in person. She's going to link with us directly via video. And there you are, Kathy. Maybe you've heard those words of introduction. So over to you, Kathy. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Michael. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Okay,
yep.
Great. And the presentation's up?
Yes, it is. Yes, yes.
Okay, good. It's kind of a strange perspective. I can't actually see what's on the screen. So, yeah, thanks very much, Michael. And Michael stole my thunder. I think I first met Michael when we were both in the CRC for Soil and Land Management, which was now quite a while ago. And I think we were both very much at the beginning of our careers, myself a little bit further along, but that CRC model was such a powerful model for bringing people together around an issue such as soils, which is a cross-cutting and cross-industry issue. So thanks very much, Michael, for asking me to speak today. And I was asked to talk about a South Australian government perspective, which is pretty broad topic, but I thought what I would do would be to give a bit of an outline of what the role of different government departments is in soils, how we set our priorities, and a little bit about SARDI and SARDI's activities, and a little bit about some aligned programs that, and there's a lot happening in this space, as many of you know. So, okay. Just to set the scene. So yeah, welcome to South Australia. And in South Australia, food, wine and agribusiness is an important part of our economy. And that's important because then it has a big impact on government policy, on strategy within government. So the revenue from food, wine and agribusiness is over 40% of the gross state product. And so that's important. So it's seen as an important industry, and it's listed as one of our key industries in terms of government focus. And that's regardless of the side of government. So just to look at, what the key industries are within South Australia. This is a figure from a couple of years ago, but the relative contributions are pretty similar. Showing how field crops, wheat, barley, pulses, particularly lentil, canola, are a key part of our state's agriculture, making up about 30%. Livestock, also important. The wine industry, I hope you get to enjoy some of your products. Those of you, our products, those of you who are from out of the state, but the wine industry, we're the largest producer of red wine, and it's a key export for South Australia. And in horticulture, South Australia is a key producer of potatoes, both fresh and processing, onions and almonds, and a range of other smaller hort crops as well. Forestry is important in the southeast of the state. And then you've got a number of other industries which are important, but smaller. So this sort of sets the scene for government policy and for the key focus of our research activities. Oops. So in terms of how we set priorities and how we think about research and development, South Australia has a number of industry roadmaps and plans. Up the top is the South Australian grains industry blueprint, and there's a blueprint for the sheep industry, for the red meat industry, and a variety of other state plans. Sitting below that, the other picture is a food, wine, and agribusiness growth strategy, setting a target for the state's revenue to be 23 billion. So that's considerably more than I think the figure of 15.8 in the earlier slide by 2030. So we've still got quite a way to go. It's an aspirational target. And then sitting underneath that are the strategic plans of various state departments. And the one that I've got there is the PIRSA strategic plan. So, in preparing for this talk, I looked through a number of these blueprints and plans and kind of looked to see how soils was positioned there. And all of these plans have sort of somewhat similar pillars or outcomes about growing productivity, about investing in people and capacity, about regions and regional infrastructure, about maintaining and growing markets, particularly export markets, access to limited resources, or sometimes there's a pillar about, maintaining our resources, and reduction of red tape, which is probably more an internal government one. So when you look through, even in the specific industry plans, you don't see many specific targets around soils. And it made me think it's so embedded in our, soils underpin obviously all of our agriculture, but they really are integral to not only sustainability targets and any sort of resource targets, but also as Ben, the previous speaker, said, or perhaps it was Paul, sorry, about market access. So increasingly, soils, management of soils, biodiversity targets, carbon targets are going to be integral to market access, so that maintain and grow markets is actually going to be underpinned in some respects by information that we have and data that we have on soils. So, I think in looking at all of this, I think there needs to be probably a more specific focus around soil so we can pull together our sort of different perspectives on soil. So I'll talk a bit about that for the remainder of this talk. So I guess when we're talking about soils, as I said, it underpins sort of much of our activities, and it's, there's a number of players here, and critically are industry groups. So there it's, I'm talking about grower groups, farming system groups. I know a number of them are members of the CRC and are speaking here today. Also industry peak bodies and associations. The research community, which many of you in the audience represent, so research organizations, private researchers increasingly. There's a very strong network here in South Australia and across the country of private research providers, universities, RDCs, and groups like the Soil CRC. Here in South Australia, we also have landscape boards or landscape SA. There's 8 landscape boards, used to be natural resource management boards that play an important role. And within government, soils targets and strategy policy sits across 2 areas. One, PIRSA, Primary Industries and Regions, and the other department is Department of Environment and Water. And increasingly, we're trying to all work together as what we'd call a community of practice to develop a more coherent strategy around soils. So, bit of a dry slide, sorry. The role of government in all of this, and that's critical because, as I said, it's a complex. Soils are a complex area in terms of there's a lot of players here, and all with a central focus on maintaining the soil resource base. And the government plays an important role in there. So there's 2 departments, as I mentioned. One of the key roles of government is about providing data and maintaining public information, mapping data, spatial data around soil properties and characteristics. The other part of that is the sort of, a capability or capacity around soils knowledge to maintain and improve productivity and profitability from soils. Another policy perspective is around awareness around soil degradation, both the on-site and off-site costs of degradation, and then monitoring soil health. I think that's become a much more important target over the last few years, 10 years, and awareness and information going out to soil managers, whether they're growers, grower groups, agronomists, of soil health trends. And last, but certainly not least, and a lot of what your conference is about is building capacity to make better decisions around soil management. So those are important roles of government, but government is part of a web of people interested in making a difference in terms of soil management. Data, as I said, is important, and that sits within the Department of Environment and Water in South Australia. So there's a number of different platforms that have fact sheets, reports, maps, land suitability assessments, spatial information, but a lot of data increasingly and appropriately sits with growers, with grower groups, with industry groups, with private researchers, even within research organizations. So one of the gaps that's been identified, and I think there's a move to try to bring at least the public data together in a more accessible and open format, because as we know, going into the future, data is a lot of power in data, power to analyze data and make decisions based on data. But at this point, it's very dispersed. And so one of the goals over the next number of years, next 5 years, is to try to bring together some of those online platforms and data to make it more transparent and usable. So just moving, I guess, to research and SARDI. PIRSA is a proud partner in the CRC. We see the CRC as an important part of, I guess, bringing a focus to soils. SARDI has 3 different broad research areas, research divisions. One is aquatic and livestock sciences, crop sciences, which is where I've had most of my career, and food sciences. So soils we've brought in additional capacity from the extension arm of PIRSA, from what was called Rural Solutions, has now come into SARDI. So the people who did research and development extension, a group of soils researchers have now come in and been integrated into our SARDI part of PIRSA, which is the Research Institute, to increase the integration of soils research into other areas, and even groups like entomology and plant health play an important role in terms of soil health. And having the soils researchers integrated into SARDI across our field crops research, our irrigated crops research, and then linking increasingly with the plant health and diagnostics group is really important. And already in only about 6 months of that structure being in place, we've seen a huge benefit into bringing having soils as a key platform, key research capability within that structure. So SARDI and PIRSA have sites right across the state, from Minnipa at Upper Eyre Peninsula, where a low rainfall mixed farming focus, down to the southeast, where we've got the Struan Research Centre near Neracourt, which is also focused on mixed farming, but in a high rainfall setting. At Turretfield, we've got medium, just north of Adelaide, we've got a medium rainfall environment, and then strong research groups at Nuriutpa around viticulture, Loxton around horticulture, particularly the Almond Centre of Excellence, and up at Clare, which is largely focused on pulse crops, but also linking to other field crops. So there's a really strong regional network within PIRSA and SARDI, and there's a real strength in that in terms of demonstration farms, having capability, like capacity and science in the regional areas to work closely with grower groups, private researchers, and to deliver impact from our research and from soils CRC research into the regions and into the hands of growers. That's the aim. So within SARDI and within PIRSA, the areas that are of key focus are soil health has been a big focus for us, and in my own career, then, development of diagnostics for soil-borne pathogens around the predictor testing and trying to avoid the situation you can see from Rhizoctonia on the slide at the bottom. But also increasingly, I guess that's moved beyond diagnostics for pathogens and risk of particular pathogens, and looked more at soil health indicators. And I'm really pleased to see that some of that work, which is around DNA diagnostics for free-living nematode communities, for mycorrhizae, for some other beneficial fungi, trichodermas, etc., has now been integrated into some of the soil CRC research, into some of the programs led by other groups. So linked to that is then the management of soil-borne constraints, both biological constraints and other constraints, and a focus on developing into the future new methodologies that are perhaps more real-time and easy to access, and increasingly the interpretation of these results. So we can develop tests, but as we know with the soil health work, the interpretation is a much bigger piece of work and a much more collaborative piece of work that's required. In addition, soil amelioration, looking at strategic application of soil amendments and with or without tillage interventions, so deep ripping, etc., and the identification and management of subsoil constraints, and particularly as we move forward, looking at soils with multiple constraints. So that those are areas of current focus, but of sort of ones that we've identified and see as priorities moving forward. All right, so as well as the research that's being done within SARDI and within current, RDC funded projects or soil CRC projects, I guess in the last couple of years, I'd say 2 to 3 years, but there's also been an explosion of other activities which are not quite soil science, but have a very close link to the work that's going on in the CRC and soils research in general. There's a development within PIRSA and of a South Australian carbon farming roadmap. At this point, we're calling it. Now, this is broader than soil carbon. It's looking at a whole range of opportunities and strategies around carbon farming for the state, and with a particular focus on methane mitigation. Sitting alongside that is a soil carbon forward plan, which is really a plan to look at the potential for South Australian soils to store carbon, and looking at, what are the opportunities, what are the barriers, and what are the research gaps. So that's an important set of plans or roadmaps, I guess, to start to bring in a stronger focus on soil carbon, and that's already been mentioned this morning. Another carbon-related program is the Growing Carbon Farming Pilot Program, which are grant programs for demonstration of carbon farming and extension of initiatives. So that's a new program which gives out grants to grower groups to look at doing some pilot demonstrations around carbon farming. So I guess the way I view some of that is, in some sense, the focus on carbon has brought back a much stronger focus on soils, which I think is a good thing. For the last 25, 30 years, I think soils perhaps has not been as explicit a target in many of our plans and industry plans as we'd like to see. And I think carbon, despite some of the limitations around what can be done in a state like South Australia with limited rainfall, I think it's brought back a stronger focus on soil, which can only be a good thing. In addition, there was a recent appointment, and I think Lucy Porter is hopefully in the audience today, through the Federal Department of Agriculture, of regional soils coordinators. And one of the roles that Lucy's going to undertake in South Australia is linking with the Landscapes SA soils extension officers to look at a gap analysis, particularly around capacity building and extension. So how do we bring together the extension, awareness and extension of soils knowledge in the state in a way that we're not sort of bumping into each other out in attempts to extend soil knowledge, and that we bring it together in a collaborative and cooperative way. And the last initiative is a really important initiative that aligns with all of these, which is the South Australian Drought Hub. So you'll all be familiar with drought hubs. The Drought Hub in South Australia is led by the University of Adelaide, with PIRSA and SARDI being key partners. The sort of mandala diagram that you see in the center of that slide is really linked to what we're talking about when we talk about the soils community of practice. So around the edge, you can see there's a number of university partners. All 3 universities in the state are partners, government departments, industry R&D partners. That includes RDCs and the Soil CRC, who will contribute research outcomes that hopefully delivered by the hub, industry organizations, grower groups, and as well as God, I can't even read the last group. It's so small on my slide. So then the delivery of those of the outcomes through the hub, delivered it across 6 regional locations that are actually not completely aligned with PIRSA hubs. Some of them are the same as the research centres for SARDI, but we've also got a pastoral node up at Port Augusta, a node at Orroroo, and a node at University of Adelaide campus at Roseworthy. So you can see that the collaborations here in the Drought Hub there's a real effort to bring together all the players in South Australia who have an interest in this case, drought resilience, but there's almost a complete overlap with, our community of practice in soils. And many of the activities around drought resilience and climate resilience are going to be, and are already, and are going to be related to soils to such an extent that the regional soils coordinator sits, sort of within the hub, this hub framework. So we see this as a really important way of assisting to bring together our whole community of practice, but also to deliver research knowledge and research projects out to the growers and the regional hub locations.
Kathy, it's Michael. I'm not sure if you can hear me. I'm not sure if you can hear our timekeeper, but if you can wrap it up, please. Thank you.
Next slide, last slide. So just to say that the state soil, all of this is coming together to develop a state soils plan around soils advocacy, data platforms, building capacity, looking at research priorities, awareness and extension, and bringing together that broad community of practice to hopefully create impact on the ground for soils research in South Australia. So thanks, Michael.
Hey, wonderful, Kathy. Thank you very much. And if you're going to show your appreciation.